afternoon, a special good afternoon to Professor Marc Holzer, Dean Amy Zhang, who's just spoken to us, Professor Arun Manharan, Professor Prajapati Trivedi, my great friend and envoy, and all the distinguished participants from across the Commonwealth and around the world. I really am delighted to be participating in this symposium for a second year running. And I'm doing so because the performance of the public sector and governance are really close to my heart. Because I have a very high regard for Professor Marc Holzer, who's an iconic pioneer in the field of public performance. It's such a pleasure to see you, albeit, Marc, only on a screen. And because it is part of my mandate as Secretary General of the Commonwealth. And I want to begin by thanking Professor Holzer and all of our colleagues for responding to the challenge I posed at last year's symposium. You may recall it. I had argued that the performance of a government lies in the eye of the beholder. Three people looking at the same government department can rate it as good, bad, or ugly. And this subjective evaluation of government can do more harm than good to the operations and the morale of the governments everywhere. There is an argument that the lack of consensus on what constitutes good performance is the fundamental problem of government performance management. As they say, what gets measured gets managed. Therefore, if we cannot measure government performance or agree on what constitutes government performance, then it's no surprise if we cannot manage government performance. And that is why I was so pleased that in 2021, last year, the Marc Holzer Symposium decided to focus on this critical and grand challenge facing public administration, with a special emphasis on the international best practices establishing generally accepted performance principles, the GAP. So since last year's symposium, the Commonwealth Secretariat has trained around 1,200 senior, most civil servants from across the Commonwealth in implementing the Commonwealth Toolkit for government performance management. And we've had some of the best and the brightest minds from more than 40 countries participating in our training programs. In every single training program, I challenge the participants to work towards generating a consensus on generally accepted performance principles. I'm happy to report that the collective effort of the participants of the 2021 Marc Holzer Symposium, together with more than 1,200 dedicated civil servants, academics, and policymakers from across the Commonwealth and the countries, have helped us produce the first draft of the generally accepted performance principles, the GAP. Now, these GAP principles have been widely discussed and debated and are now summarized by Professor Marc Holzer and Professor Prajapati Trivedi. And the Commonwealth Secretariat is now in the process of publishing this consensus view on GAP as a monograph for further discussion and review. And as some of you may know, Professor Trivedi presented these GAP principles on behalf of the Secretariat at the 21st session of the United Nations Committee of Experts on Public Administration, CEPA. Now, our hope now is that next year, GAP principles will be a distinct agenda item for discussion by the UN's Committee of Experts on Public Administration. And I am optimistic that Commonwealth leadership can help to build a global consensus on GAP principles. You all know we've got 54 countries at the moment as part of the Commonwealth, about 1/3 of the world, that's 6 billion people. And because of the breadth, we really do represent a global view. Because we have driven consensus before. If you look at the SDGs, all 17 of which are reflected in the Commonwealth Charter, agreed by our family of 54 nations 2 years earlier. In 2013, we agreed them. 2015, the rest of the world came up with the SDGs. And if you compare the two, they are a mirror. But also look at the original Earth Summit and the Paris Climate Accords, both agreed soon after decisive statements on climate change and the environment from Commonwealth leaders. And the Commonwealth, as I said earlier, is a third of the world, but with a breadth of geography, socioeconomics, and culture that makes us a snapshot of the whole. So if our 54 nations in all their diversity, from Australian Belize to Indian Sierra Leone, can agree, then why can't everyone agree? And that is my hope for the GAP principles. And when that happens, and the GAP principles become part of the mainstream, I am sure that the Marc Holzer Symposium will be seen as landmark moments that change the game in public performance management. And I'm struck by the depth and the breadth of the agenda for this year's symposium. And alongside my gratitude for Marc Holzer, I also want to recognize John Kaminsky, one of the founders of the American Government Performance Act, GAPRA, of 1993. The GAPRA represents one of the most sustained efforts to improve government performance management anywhere in the world. And I say with confidence that the GAPRA and the draft GAP principles are very much aligned. In their whole of government approach, government is a team sport and not a solo event. In the importance of a strong and unambiguous legal foundation for the government performance initiatives to provide strong foundations and continuity through change, in this, the GAPRA experience is telling. In ensuring accountability for results all the way to the top. And I could go on and discuss the relationship between all 16 GAP principles and the GAPRA, but I think I'm going to leave that to others because there's a lot of people who I know are going to want to talk about this, but I simply emphasize that the importance of having a consistent yardstick shaped by best practice across the world to determine whether performance management systems are robust enough to serve their purpose and ensure government departments deliver what they promise to. So before closing, I want to acknowledge and welcome the presence of so many senior officials from the Commonwealth countries. You have, and you know how passionately I believe in you. And I really loved the fact that over the last, certainly the last year, you've worked so steadily on this issue. And you know you can rely on me to work with you to carry forward these ideas in your countries. Reforming government performance management system is not easy. And it does not grab headlines. But in a way, it is the mother of all reform and the foundation for good government. As I've said, in today's world, the competitive and comparative advantage of nations depends on the effectiveness of a country's government. In this information age, making policies has become relatively easier. We have a lot of information available on best practice policies for many of our policy challenges. That is why most failures can be traced to policy implementation and not to policy formulation. Time has come to shift our collective focus on implementation capacity and not just policy making capacity. This is where GAP principles would be very helpful. These principles can provide us with the toolkit to design more effective government performance management systems to serve people more efficiently and effectively and build a healthier, happier, more secure and more prosperous future for all. That is the goal which I have no doubt we all share. And I wish everyone involved today my very best. And I thank you for your time. I thank you for your energy, your commitment. And I thank you for wanting to be the difference that we need to make in our world. So thank you, everyone.